Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." What if our inability to heal is not a failure of medicine or mindset, but the consequence of fleeing the very questions that could set us free? Questions like, what am I avoiding? What am I protecting? Who would I become if I were truly well? This is not just about recovery, it's about revelation, about turning inward not to escape the world, but to face the full truth of ourselves. Because beneath the fatigue and the aching limbs may lie something far more potent than trauma. It could be identity. The unconscious mind, when wounded and unheard, will manifest its cry in the body. Jung called this the shadow, the exiled parts of ourselves we disown, suppress or bury beneath performance and pretense. But what we do not bring to consciousness, he warned, will appear in our lives as fate. And for many, that fate takes the form of chronic pain, emotional collapse, or a sense of spiritual numbness. There is a peculiar irony embedded in the human experience often, that which brings us the greatest suffering also offers the deepest truth. Modern man seeks healing as if it were a destination, something to be attained through prescriptions, clean eating, or perfect routines. But what if healing is not something you do to the body, but something you must allow within the psyche? In my work, I have observed that many afflictions do not stem from the external world, but rather from an inner fracture, a disconnection from the self. And so I invite you not to abandon your treatments or silence your symptoms, but to become still and ask the deeper question, what part of me is trying to be seen? Because when the unconscious is heard, truly heard, it no longer needs to scream through pain. You are not broken. You are becoming. And that journey begins not with another fix, but with a different kind of question. Consider this illness is not always an invader. Sometimes it is a companion, a guardian, even a home. For many, the body has become the stage upon which unconscious conflicts are played out. Symptoms arise not as enemies to be vanquished, but as coded language, the psyche's last-ditch effort to be heard when all other forms of communication have failed. And yet modern man, armed with science but starved of meaning, rushes to silence these messages, mistaking the cry for the cause. In Jungian psychology, we call this the emergence of the shadow. Those aspects of ourselves we deny, reject, or hide because they do not fit the image we wish to present to the world. But the shadow does not vanish simply because we refuse to look at it. It gathers power in secrecy. And when unexamined, it spills into our behaviors, our emotions, and yes, even our physiology. The body, after all, is not disconnected from the soul. It is the vessel through which the soul expresses its needs. Let us reflect on a difficult truth. Some individuals do not fear the illness itself, they fear what their life might look like without it. This is not a conscious choice. No one wakes up and decides to remain unwell. But in the unconscious, where the deepest fears and desires reside, illness may serve a purpose. It can shield us from expectations. It can preserve relationships that thrive on sympathy. It can justify the delay of our unlived lives. Illness then becomes a structure, an identity, around which the ego forms a sense of stability. Who are you if you are no longer the one who needs help? Who are you without the label, without the role of the struggler, the survivor, the one who is still not quite better? These questions strike fear in the heart of the ego, for they threaten to dissolve a known identity, even one built on pain. The ego, clings to certainty, even if that certainty is misery. Carl Jung once wrote, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." If your illness has lasted years, if you've done everything right and still feel stuck, perhaps the invitation is not to try harder, but to listen deeper. Not with judgment, but with radical curiosity. Ask yourself, not with frustration, but with sincerity, what is this illness protecting me from? It could be the terror of finally chasing your purpose and failing. It could be the confrontation of old grief you have long buried. It could be that health would no longer excuse you from responsibilities, from change, from becoming something more. If so, then illness has not just become part of your life, it has become a part of your self-concept. And until that role is examined, no amount of therapy, medication, or biohacking can untangle the knot. Now, do not misunderstand. This is not blame. This is not suggesting your suffering is fabricated or chosen. It is an appeal to explore the soul-level dynamics at play. Because what we resist in the mind will often manifest in the body, and what we leave unresolved in the shadow will repeat until acknowledged. In this light, healing must be reframed. It is not a return to who you once were that self may have been complicit in the imbalance. Healing is not restoration, it is transformation. It asks, not, how can I go back, but rather, who am I now becoming? It is in this space of becoming, this sacred liminal space, that we begin to write a new story. One not defined by illness, but by meaning. We must understand one of the most overlooked truths of the human psyche. The subconscious does not care about your happiness. It cares about your survival. That's why, even when the conscious mind cries out for healing energy and freedom, the deeper layers of the psyche may resist. They do not trust the light until the dark has been honored. In Jungian psychology, this tension is not a sign of weakness. It is the natural push and pull between the persona, the mask we wear, and the shadow, the parts we hide. In this space, you are not fixing yourself. You are rediscovering yourself. The you that existed before the wound, before the role, before you were taught that your needs were too much or your truth was too heavy. And it is in this rediscovery that healing ceases to be an outcome and becomes a process of liberation. So if you find yourself circling the same mountain, asking why healing hasn't arrived, stop and listen. Ask the deeper question, what part of me is still afraid of being free? Because when you hear that answer, not with judgment, but with compassion, something ancient begins to shift. Not just in the mind, but in the marrow. And from there, true transformation begins not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Let's consider a powerful concept known in clinical psychology as secondary gain, the hidden benefits we receive from remaining in a state of dysfunction. This is not manipulation. This is adaptation. Suppose someone has been chronically unwell for years. They might say, I want to feel better, and they mean it. But what if being unwell has also been their only pathway to rest, to tenderness, to being cared for, without having to perform? Then the body, through the lens of the subconscious, has formed an unspoken bargain. If pain gives me what love does not, then I will cling to pain. We see this dynamic again and again. People missing appointments, ignoring healing practices, resisting change that would clearly benefit them. Not because they are lazy or sabotaging themselves, but because the nervous system is obeying a different master. a deeper logic, a survival instinct rooted in the past. Carl Jung taught that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. If you've ever wondered why your efforts seem to crumble just as things begin to improve, or why hope itself triggers anxiety, it may be because your nervous system associates healing with danger, with responsibility, with exposure. The ego often fears that if it heals, it will lose the familiar. It will lose the identity it has built around the role of being the struggler, the fighter, the survivor. And while those identities may be painful, they are predictable. And the psyche clings to the predictable like a child clings to a blanket, not because it is warm, but because it is known. To move beyond this, we must ask different questions. Not, how do I get better, but what truth have I been too afraid to name? Perhaps the illness is covering an unbearable truth that your job is killing your spirit, that your relationship has become a cage, that your dreams have been buried under years of practicality. When these truths rise to the surface, they are often disguised as symptoms, headaches, fatigue, anxiety, numbness. Not because the body is weak, but because the soul is pleading for attention. And yet even in this, there's profound intelligence. The psyche is never trying to destroy you. It is trying to protect the parts of you that are still raw, still fragmented, still waiting for integration. When a person says, "I just want to feel good," Jung would ask, to what end? Feeling good without meaning is a hollow pursuit. It is not a compass. It does not orient the psyche toward a larger narrative. Healing, then, cannot occur in a vacuum. It must be tethered to purpose, to vision, to the emergence of a new identity, one strong enough to replace the old role that suffering has played. And this new identity must feel emotionally safer than the illness itself, or the psyche will never release its grip. That is why small symbolic actions are so powerful. If you wake up tomorrow and ask yourself, if I were already well, how would I live today? You begin to train your nervous system to believe in safety beyond suffering. You begin to rewrite the story, not through force, but through familiarity. Because the psyche does not follow logic, it follows repetition. And with enough small acts of integrity, of authenticity, of self-trust, the old contract between pain and protection begins to unravel. There comes a moment, often quiet but unmistakable, when the soul begins to stir beneath the layers of exhaustion, frustration, and resignation. It does not shout. It whispers. It does not demand. It waits. And yet, most of us are too entangled in the daily negotiation with pain to notice that something deeper is calling. This is where healing begins to take on a different shape, not as a return to the person we once were, but as an awakening to the person we were always meant to become. This shift cannot be forced. It must be felt. The soul does not respond to pressure, it responds to alignment. That is why healing cannot be reduced to formulas. It is not about fixing what is broken. It is about reconnecting with what is sacred. And when you begin to live in alignment, even in the smallest ways, the nervous system starts to recalibrate. The body no longer interprets the world as a battlefield. The mind no longer assumes every change is a threat. And the heart, long guarded, begins to open to the possibility that wellness isn't just a dream. It's a memory of who you were before fear wrote the script. So ask yourself now, what part of my suffering have I mistaken for my identity? And if I released that part, what would I finally be free to become? Because in that question lies the doorway not just to recovery, but to rebirth. Healing is not about returning to the person the world once accepted. It is about becoming the person your soul has always known you to be. Let that truth be the compass that guides your next step. Not out of pain, but toward purpose. Not to erase who you've been, but to embrace who you are becoming. Carl Jung understood that transformation does not begin in comfort. It begins in crisis, when the structures of the ego begin to crack and the old identities no longer hold. For those living with chronic illness, the question is not simply, how do I feel better, but who am I without the struggle? The problem is not pain alone. It is what that pain has come to represent: protection, identity, familiarity. You see, we often construct our self-concept around the very thing we long to be free from. When you've spent years waking up in fatigue, planning your life around limitations and shaping relationships through the lens of fragility, illness is no longer an experience. It becomes an anchor of identity. And the moment the possibility of healing appears, it threatens to tear away not just the pain, but the scaffolding that has supported your inner world. This is why healing feels terrifying. It is not the body that resists change. It is the ego. The ego fears annihilation in transformation. It asks, what if I get better and I fail? What if I heal and lose the care I once received? What if health means I must now face the dreams I've abandoned? These are not casual questions. These are existential dilemmas that require not willpower, but inner inquiry. Jung referred to this passage through darkness as the process of individuation, the journey of becoming whole by integrating both the light and shadow within. The goal is not perfection, it is authenticity. When we chase healing solely to eliminate symptoms, we miss the deeper invitation to evolve into a version of ourselves that no longer requires pain to justify stillness, to seek compassion, or to feel valuable. But to step into this new version of self, we must be willing to mourn the old one. Yes, mourn. Because healing is also a kind of grief, the loss of the familiar story. And grief, when unacknowledged, becomes resistance. This is why so many people stall at the edge of a breakthrough. The pain isn't just in the body, it's in the letting go of a narrative that once gave meaning to their suffering. So how do we cross the threshold? It begins with purpose. Not the kind sold in personal development seminars, but the kind that emerges when we ask ourselves, what is so meaningful to me that I would endure the discomfort of change to pursue it? Because the psyche will not release the old unless it believes the new is safe, is real, and is worthy of the risk. Purpose doesn't need to be grand. It doesn't need to involve a complete reinvention. Sometimes purpose is simply this: waking up and choosing to live today as though your life matters. Taking one small step that affirms I am not just a vessel of symptoms. I am a bearer of meaning. At some point, every healing journey arrives at a threshold, the place where biology and psychology intertwine so deeply that to address only one is to misunderstand both. We may begin with physical symptoms, with fatigue, inflammation, or inexplicable pain, but slowly we are led inward to a terrain no medical chart can measure the soul. And in that sacred space, we begin to see that illness is not only a dysfunction, it is also a communication. It is the soul's rebellion against a life that no longer reflects the truth of who we are. This is the work of true healing. It is not about transcending the body. It is about listening to it so deeply that its wisdom becomes inseparable from your own. And in that listening, you begin to shift. Slowly, subtly, powerfully. You reclaim your life not by chasing who you once were, but by becoming who you never allowed yourself to be. Jung did not promise quick fixes. He offered a map for those brave enough to descend into the depths and return with their full selves intact. And that is the journey before you, now not simply to silence the pain, but to outgrow the need for it by living a life so honest, so aligned, that the soul no longer needs to rebel. That is not just healing. That is individuation. That is freedom. Carl Jung understood this intimately. He saw the body not as a separate entity from the psyche, but as its mirror, what he called the unconscious made visible. When the deeper truths of the psyche are denied or buried, the body often becomes the last remaining voice for the soul. Tension, anxiety, chronic illness. They may all be symbols not of failure, but of forgotten needs, of unlived truths, of repressed desires that have waited patiently for recognition. This is why in Jungian thought we do not fight symptoms, we listen to them. We ask what message they carry from the depths. Because until we understand why the body continues to cry out, we risk silencing the signal without resolving the cause. And worse, we miss the chance for profound transformation that such suffering can awaken. Let us ask now honestly and without judgment, what are we still afraid to confront? What truth would be too disruptive, too destabilizing if brought fully into the light? Perhaps it's the recognition that the life we've built, its pace, its expectations, its roles, was never truly ours to begin with. Perhaps illness, in its mysterious intelligence, has been the only way the soul could slow us down long enough to hear our own voice again. Jung believed that the path to healing was not found in suppression or in escapism, but in integration, bringing the disowned parts of ourselves back into conscious awareness. He wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." In this context, healing becomes less about eliminating pain and more about becoming large enough to contain it without being defined by it. This is a radical departure from how we've been conditioned to approach wellness. Our culture tends to reduce health to performance, how productive we are, how energetic we feel, how fixed we appear on the outside. But the psyche doesn't care for appearances. It yearns for truth. And if truth means slowing down, walking away, feeling deeply, or saying no to what no longer nourishes the soul, then illness may persist until we realign. The invitation, then, is to create a life that no longer needs illness to feel aligned. A life built not on constant striving or perfection, but on authenticity, on sovereignty, on a daily relationship with our own inner authority. This is where transformation takes root, not in a sudden breakthrough, but in the daily decision to live from our inner truth, even if that truth disrupts what others expect of us. We must become curious, even reverent, toward the parts of us we've denied. The dream we abandoned to please others, the anger we suppressed to keep the peace, the creativity we buried beneath responsibility. These are not distractions, they are fragments of the self, waiting to be reclaimed. And the longer they are ignored, the more loudly the body will protest in their name. So if you are navigating chronic symptoms, emotional heaviness, or a sense that your healing has plateaued, consider this. What part of my truth have I been too afraid to honor? What change have I postponed in the name of safety? Because your symptoms may not be punishment. They may be signposts urging you to reroute your life toward deeper congruence. In the end, the true path of healing is not paved with certainty, nor is it marked by a sudden absence of symptoms. It is marked by your willingness to face yourself fully courageously without distraction. It is the path of individuation, of becoming whole, not by avoiding the darkness, but by making peace with it. For what we reject does not disappear, it waits, it watches, and if necessary, it speaks through the body. Carl Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." If your life has been shaped by suffering, by a diagnosis, by fatigue, by endless attempts to get better, let this be the moment you stop chasing a cure and begin inviting meaning. Let this be the moment you ask, not, "How do I fix myself?" but "What is my soul asking me to become?" We are not here to return to who we were before the pain. That version of us, however innocent, may have lived in quiet betrayal of the truth. Healing is not going backward. It is becoming. Becoming someone who no longer needs suffering to rest. Becoming someone who no longer hides behind limitations to avoid fear. Becoming someone who lives every day as a whole human being, light and shadow, joy and pain, power and humility. And yes, you will wobble. You will forget. Some days, your old identity will whisper, "Come back. It was safer here." But if you listen closely, your soul will speak louder. It will say you are allowed to grow beyond this. It will remind you that the discomfort you feel is not a punishment. It is a sign that you are outgrowing the old story. You do not need to be perfect to begin. You need only to be honest with yourself, with your needs, with your longings. Because when you begin to live from that place of integrity, the body begins to soften, the mind begins to open, and the symptoms, while still present, begin to lose their grip on your identity. Let this video be a mirror, not a prescription. Let it reflect what you've known all along, that your healing is not just about feeling better. It's about remembering who you are beneath the illness, beyond the fear. If something in today's journey stirred you, if a part of you felt seen or a truth finally named, don't let that awareness slip away. Share your reflection in the comments. Your story may be the very thing someone else needs to read today. And if you're walking this path of self-discovery, shadow integration, and soulful healing, subscribe to my channel. Together, we're building a space for those who are done chasing surface solutions and ready to explore the deeper truth. You are not alone in this. Your story is still unfolding, and I promise what lies ahead is more than just recovery. It is your return to the self.